did. That was good. That was good. Yeah. And it's under your number too, so.
Glad that all of you are here today.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks for coming.
I tried to change it. So.
You can go ahead and get situated. Your notes page 60. And then put your feet on the floor. We're going to do a little bit longer of an opening today. So if you feel as though, centering yourself, if you want to put your hand on your heart and on your gut, finding that place of inner stillness. And then take a couple of good breaths, breathing into your belly. Then I'd like you to open your awareness to the hand's journey through time. The hand, our hands, your hands. We looked at this image on Wednesday of last week. So opening your awareness to the hand's journey through time. This was once a fin in the primordial seas where life began, just as it was again in your mother's womb in your lifetime. Countless adventures since then have shaped it, both as a species and as individuals. This hand connected with trees and wind as it refined its intelligence. This hand, our ancestors are in it. Ancestors who learned to push up on dry land, to climb, to reach, to grasp. The grasping hands of primates are an adaptation to life in the trees. From there then to tool making and using those tools to chip rocks, to gather weeds, to weave those weeds into baskets, to gather seeds and to harvest them and to plant them again, to make fire and to carry it banked on the long marches through those ages of ice. It's all in that hand, your hand, from an unbroken succession of adventures. Similarly, open your awareness to this hand's journey through your lifetime. Ever since your hands came out of your mother's womb, the clever hand that has learned so much, learned to reach for breast or for bottle to gain food, learned to tie shoelaces, learned to write and to draw, learned to wipe the tears of yourself and the tears of others. You know there are people living now who believe they are worthwhile and lovable because of what your hands have shown them. Two, there are people living now who will be healed in mind or body by the power that this hand allows to flow through it. And there are people living now whose last touch in life will come from this hand, maybe your hand. They will be able to go into their dying knowing that they are not abandoned. So take a good long look at your hands. They are a history book of where you've been. There might be scars there, the lines in your palms, the story of you. The book of where you've been and everything you've touched and worked for. Think of the handshakes you've shared, the hugs you've shared, and feel how those felt. Some weak or strong, some hands that are rough or soft. Through other people's hands, you have felt some of that person's character, or even the kind of work they have done. Think about how your hands feel when you've held a baby. Your hands are not only strong and capable, but they are filled with love and beauty. So our hands, a way that we take in information around the world, into our own being. Our hands, the tools that we use most often, and how those have co-evolved with all the living things, particularly the trees around us. So this is where we were last week, thinking about the idea that we were You know, we're all in this tree of life together. And so right now, I'd like you to imagine a gathering of all these species. So one representative of every species on the planet, and you're all sitting around in a circle. You're sitting there in that circle with them. So imagine all those species, you know, the things that come to mind first, maybe those, you know, the big mammals, like I would want to sit in a circle with polar bear. Wouldn't that be pretty crazy? And then there's fox, you know, there are those mammals, and then you might think, oh, toads have to be there, and salamanders have to be there, worms have to be there, and all kinds of these things around this circle, okay? So imagine this gathering of all the species, and your task in that circle is to think about who is the best. Who's the best in the circle? So that's what our topic is today. Who's the best? So plants are in your circle. You know, you might be sitting there with an oak tree or with a little patch of moss. So trees, all the green things, the green life we talked about, they're snagging photons, right? Those light, that light, they're snagging it at 186,000 miles per second. They're taking it in and making food that without it, nothing would be here. Making all of the food that begins all of the food chains. So plants. We talked quite a lot about plants the other day. Plants are pretty great. Are plants the best? Oh, let's see. Worms. What about worms? Are worms the best? Oh, you're sitting in this circle, you know, and the worms are right there next to you, and you're kind of thinking, huh, worms. Earthworms might seem kind of gross or insignificant, and yet they play a really essential role in the food chains and the ecosystem. So when plants and animals die, that decaying matter becomes food for decomposers like bacteria and fungi and earthworms. Decomposers, they're also known as saprotrophs. They're eating those dead plants and animals and recycling those nutrients that we've talked about, the nitrogen and the carbon, and that stuff gets then pooped out and released back into the soil, the air and the water. So they're recycling all these, you know, all the nutrients that we've talked about. So without worms, decomposers in general, then you know, we wouldn't be here. If those nutrients got used up once and then there was nothing to take care of it, life wouldn't be here. So the composting, you know, Penn State does a good job of composting food waste. Compost is really important. If those nutrients that, you know, in your leftover bagel, if you're throwing it in the trash, it's going into a plastic bag, which then goes off to the landfill, and it doesn't have any oxygen or the things that it needs, or these decomposers, to send those nutrients back to Earth. So we have to be thinking about composting, the nutrients that are, you know, left over. So we don't want those nutrients to be locked up for an indeterminate amount of time in the landfill. So here we are, you know, are worms and decomposers the best? What about this? How many of you have seen these in the wild? Yeah, sweet. I know a number of you have already mentioned how much you love the ocean. How about horseshoe crabs? Or horseshoe crabs? The best? Horseshoe crabs are marine and brackish water arthropods. They are true crabs, which are crustaceans, so they're different. They're in a different family. Their origin was 450 million years ago. Horseshoe crabs here on the planet. They're considered living fossils because they really haven't changed much over the course of 450 million years. One of the oldest living things, certainly one of the oldest living animals on the planet. Gosh, they must have really cool adaptations to survive. Are horseshoe crabs the best? Just FYI, our ancestors have been around about 6 million years, and then humans, really in this form, 200,000 years ago. So really a blink of time compared to 450 million years ago. Horseshoe crabs. Pretty great. So what about this? Bacteria. Bacteria? Are bacteria the best? Ugh. Bacteria as a group have a remarkable repertoire of capabilities. They can swim like animals, they can photosynthesize like plants, they can decompose dead organic material like fungi do. Bacteria have pioneered into existence all of life's essential metabolic processes. So all the places that energy is moving, it's all because bacteria got things started. Biologists now estimate that Earth may house as many as 1 trillion distinct species of microbes. Bacteria have been maintaining this vast global network, exchanging genetic material, adapting and innovating for almost 4 billion years. So a legitimate one-word answer to what is life? One word might be bacteria. Bacteria initially populated the planet and they have never relinquished their hold. So bacteria. We humans live on a planet that is run for and by invisible microbes. They created our biosphere, they made the soil, they set the conditions for evolution of multicellular life, including us. And actually, right now, bacteria, by the millions, are all around you and me. They're on your phone, they're on your water bottle, they're on your hands before you wash them, and they're on your hands after you wash them. It's no surprise that bacteria inhabit the outside surfaces of your body and my body, with hundreds of thousands per square inch on your arms and your legs, and your trunk and on your face. And they're in us. In your body, bacteria outnumber your own cells 10 to 1. 10 to 1. Not only is there a multitude out there, but there's a multitude. You, I, we are a multitude, right? Our body is a swirling, pulsating ecosystem filled with this wild assortment of creatures that helps us to survive. These are almost all micro animals. Bacteria, you could fit 1,000 on the head of a pin. So just as one example, inside your mouth, there are an estimated 300 different species of bacteria living inside your mouth, right at this moment. A microscopy expert took swabs from inside his mouth and placed them under a scanning electron microscope to reveal the bacteria growing on the cells of his tongue and his cheek. That's what's in this picture. So different kinds, you can kind of see the different shapes. There's like this kind, and then there are these long, tall ones, and then there are kind of blobby ones over here. And so these have been dyed different colors so that we can see the different types of bacteria. Freaking cool, electron microscope. So some bacteria can cause gum disease or tooth decay, and yet others are super beneficial. His research showed that some of these species are adapted to the environment just on the tip of the tongue, and some prefer the back of the tongue, and others inhabit the cheek pouches, and yet others feed on the plaque on our teeth to help us. But this only scratches the surface. This only scratches the surface. In fact, if you were able to count all the cells that comprise your human body, between 30 and 40 trillion, then tally up all of the microbes living in your body, the microbes, like that first slide showed, would outnumber your cells. So even though you might think of yourself as a separate individual, different, separate from all the people around you, separate from the world out there. Actually, more accurately, you're just a separate walking bacterial colony from the people around you. So when it comes to DNA, the master molecule directing all of our body processes, a mere 1% of your body's DNA is of human origin, and the other 99% of your DNA resides in your bacteria. So how is it with you? How have you been conditioned to think about bacteria? Are you on friendly terms with your bacteria housemates? Or do you tend to associate bacteria more with dirt or disease? If it's the latter, it's not surprising. Most of us have been socialized to believe that bacteria are our enemies. But rather than seeing bacteria as villains, what if we were to expand our consciousness and view them for what most of them really are? They're symbionts. They're working together with us. They're essential for our health and our well-being inside our bodies. So what happens if you make that mental shift? Why don't you talk to your neighbor about that? Can you shift a little bit? So maybe bacteria not only are, in us and on us, but maybe they're also friends in some way. Other studies provide evidence that the composition of our gut microbiome, right, all the things that happen in our digestive system, it influences our level of contentment. So serotonin and dopamine, those cool things, those neurotransmitters that we've talked about that are happening in our bodies, they're associated with feelings of pleasure and well-being. They're actually produced by microbes inside of our guts. It appears that by regulating the production and release of these two neurotransmitters, our gut bacteria may exercise the power to control our mood, whether we're anxious or relaxed, as well as behaviors, whether we're withdrawn or whether we're outgoing. And they've done this by taking timid mice and the outgoing mice, and they've shared microbiomes. And suddenly, the timid mice become more outgoing, and the more outgoing mice become more timid. So there's some evidence that thinks, that there's this idea that it also happens with skinny mice and more obese mice. They switch those microbiomes, and then they also switch their characteristics. So our gut microbiome controls so much of what's happening in our bodies. You might think, well, those are just mice, and yet they're mammals, just like you and me, and their biology reflects our own. So a lot of these kind of studies happen in rodents, and then, more studies can happen later. So the power and capability of these bacteria, maybe just maybe, bacteria are the best. There's no solitary free living creature. Every form of life is dependent on other forms. So we did that whole superior and inferior thing before. Where do our biases lie? So if we think about this process of evolution that has produced Earth's tree of life, the tree has all these different branches, all these different evolutionary lines that created different things. And so each of the buds on these branches, our species is just one of those, Homo sapiens. No better, no worse than all the other buds on that tree. It's really the totality of species, all of them put together, that constitute the wonder and magnificence of life on Earth. So in the end, if we pull out, there's fungi and ferns and falcons and fish and fox, we're all made of the same stuff, all unique intelligences. We are not separate from, but participants in, very directly participants in life's web. And this comes from both science and then also the world's wisdom traditions, reminding us that we are not separate, but we belong to this community. So what happens if we think about how we live in relationship with, how we experience that relationship, how we can embody that relationship, and that we need to be willing to recognize that we're citizens in a matter of a huge community, that big circle that you envisioned. So we'll ask some more. What about owls? If Earth didn't have these predators, the thing owls and snakes and foxes and bobcats, the place would be overrun with small rodents. Owls able to fly silently to catch their prey and avoid predators, their feathers are incredibly soft so that they can be more quiet, for instance, than hawks are. Their hearing capacity greatly outweighs ours. And those eyes, right? They're stunning. Those eyes are crazy cool. They can collect 5 times as much light with their rods, their light collecting cells, than we can. Their nighttime vision, therefore, surpasses ours. Because of these eyes, owls get the reputation of being really wise. And in their own way, they are. They do things that I can't even imagine being able to do. So understanding that their capabilities, that owl intelligence, that owl sensitivities, or tree intelligence, or horseshoe crab intelligence, worm intelligence, it's all of those things, all of those different groups are sensitive in different ways. And then, as individuals, how cool is it that we are all different too? We all, every person in this room has different things, sensitivities. Maybe you have a sensitivity, you can really, rhythm is your thing. Or for me, color is my thing. My eyes, I love seeing different colors. It makes me feel really alive inside. Number patterns, or knowing bird songs, having the healing power of touch, understanding emotional nuances. People who are able to read lips or sense subtle energy shifts. People who are good at nonverbal communication. So being outside of our brain and thinking about these full body intelligences, whether it's in different species or whether it's in our species, each of us as individuals, flourishing depends so much more than just IQ, right? There's emotional and social and intuitive intelligences. All of this plays central roles in individual development and cultural well-being, celebrating those sensitivities, those capacities that we have. And, having the opportunity to support people that are different than us, exploring the richness of how we are different is pretty darn exciting. It's a very dynamic way of looking at the world. Living beings know their world. all of these different intelligences. In your text, you'll read about Umwelt, U-M-W-E-L-T. Umwelt is how it's pronounced. It's a German word. And that means a being's particular way of being in the world, ways of knowing and sensing their realms. So, what's it really like to be this screech owl? And understanding that their experience is so different than ours, and yet just as valuable. Just like the idea of plants communicating with each other may have seemed absurd, but now no longer is, there are people who have capacities for interspecies communication in different ways too. The healers of Madagascar, when they are asked which of the 15,000 species of plants is best for treating a certain disease, they reply that they wait for the plants to tell them.